Good morning, dear participants. Good morning, dear artists. Welcome to the second day of the symposium. Small is Beautiful in Salzburg. We are about to have the last online block with Jonatan Carrasco, then with Nikolaus Gerszewski, and then with Benn Lunn. So you're very welcome. ¿Me oyes, Jonatan?
Hola, sí.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So Jonatan Carrasco, we're very happy to have you here. And I have to just move the page. Sorry. Good morning, Richard. You look great.
Good morning.
Like always.
Beautiful day.
Mm-hmm. Jonatan Carrasco was born in Puebla, in Mexico, in 1981. He attended the BUAP's School of Arts, studying composition. He has a master's degree in educational technology. His music has been played in different countries as Brazil, Argentina, France, Italy, Netherlands, Spain, Nigeria, and Korea. He has participated in festivals in Mexico as in other countries. His main interest in composition is to mix music with technology as the fixed media, live coding, live electronics, etc. He has the following prizes: first place in the first guitar contest BUAP 2005, winning in guitar composition contest Poesía Seis Cuerdas in 2006, first place in the composition contest Sonidos de una Batalla 2012, third place International Ilde Sinatep Award for Innovative Teaching Practices in Iberoamerica and the Caribbean in 2017, winner of the third composition contest for percussion quartet and new technologies by the SAFA Percussion Quartet in 2019, first place in the composition contest in first composition contest for orchestra Orfix 2020, winner of the commemorative composition contest of the 500 years since the fall of Mexico, Tenochtitlan, in the category of work for mixed choir and percussion ensemble in 2021, and many other prizes. Please welcome Mr. Jonatan Carrasco. Jonatan Carrasco.
Thank you, Agustin. Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Can you already see it? Thank you.
Yes, lovely.
Well, let's start. The name of this presentation is Data for Automatic Creation of Microtonal Scales Used in the Fixed Media work called Tenoni. Well, first, I want to say an introduction. The word Tenoni is a word in Nahuatl that means something to be cut. I use this word for this composition, and I want to relate the word with the concept of the microtonalism. So that's the reason that I used this word to call the music. Well, I want to start with a little introduction. The piece called Tenoni is an stereo fixed media work based in microtonal scales. For the composition, I made a patch in the programming language of pure data. This patch received a number to know how many parts the octet should be divided, and automatically it does the calculation for every frequency and gives a graph to show it. We can see in the screen this program. I will explain better later. Besides, you can also specify the number of steps to create a scale based in those pitches, and the program automatically will create a scale with that amount. In addition, based on these select nodes, we can also make chords by defining up to 10 random nodes. The aim of this patch was to experiment sonorities from diverse kinds of microtones and the possibilities of having random systems to create scales and use it in different ways in our work. Likewise, it can be used for many other applications, such as their possible use in acoustic music and not only for electronic music. In the process, many interesting sonorities were found and helped to improve the patch, and the patch helped improve to finding of other attractive combination of pitches and chords. Well, addressing microtonality is complicated in an instrumental context. However, within an electroacoustical music context, it can be a little easier to do, since it doesn't represent a technical or notation challenge for any performing musician. However, being able to establishing the method that allows to do it in a more orderly and systematically way is something that more complicated and could lead to adapting some methods from other form of sound organization, such as adapting the 12-tone tuning or to the quarter-tone tuning, where we will have a series of 24 sounds instead of 12. I already use this way of creating series based in microtonal tunings in other patches, in other music, within the Pure Data or Pure Data program. Here I create random series of 24 sounds, like in quarter tones. However, it was only limited to the preset use of an exact division of the octave, and always that was equal in quarter tones, and creating randomly an organization of these same quarter tones, but another way of dividing the octave into other parts, other amount of parts. It can be done, but with this new way to use the program, it was a little more free. To starting, the Pure Data program is a free software. It's a programming language based on data flow, unlike other languages. In this one, there are boxes called objects that encapsulate instructions and can be connected to each other to do programming in a workspace called Patcher. In each section, there is an on window called Patch. Let me show you a little example. This is the program. So we can see here some part. For example, I want to put some instruction like this. I wrote OSC and then so this object encapsulates some instructions, this object can make sine wave. So I can write the frequency like an A note, or I can put another box and put like a wire to join it. So I can manipulate the numbers here. So this object can do some sound. Now we can hear any sounds because it is not connected to anything. I may connect this with another wire and maybe we can start listening. Let me see. You can hear some sound. So this is the way this program, Pure Data, works. Everything is made of these boxes, and we can connect them to make any sound or any kind of programming we want. So this is only an introduction of this program. Let me continue. The method. Well, first, the formula for the creation of equal temperaments was dealt with this formula here. The formula we all know, and where the 12th root is used to obtain 12 sounds and of the temperate system, and to get other subdivisions, the number 12 is changed by the division we need. For example, to make a division in quarter tones, we only have to change the 12 for a 24, like this, and this is the resulting number. The first difficult came here in the program because it naturally can't do roots that way. So I have to do an adaptation to this operation to extract the power of a number. Since the same formula can be expressed in power form, was a way to doing in the program. For example, this way. The pure data patch remains as follows, where you can see the explanation where it says number of steps is the numbers of division that can be changed by the user of the program, entering the number directly and drag it with the mouse. The program will perform the operation automatically every time you move this box. In this example, we have the number 12, but it can be changed. So for the formula, we can see how we can do it in the program. This is the way we can do it. So for any other division, like quarter tones, we have to change the 12 for a 24 and so on. So that was the way we can do it a little easier in the program. Next, to write the resulting notes, the base note of central C by 251.6 Hertz was used in a block that was repeat the same number of times as the necessary division. It will begin by multiplying the base frequency by the resulting power, and then the next frequency by the same value, and so on, until reach the number of steps given. In addition to carry out the necessary operation, it was necessary to save data in some way. That is why an array was used to be able to store it. Each time the number of octet division changed, that data have to be sent to that size. The graph could be readjusted to save the exact amount of numbers, and also could be displayed correctly. The path part sends the same number of division to another part of the patch in change of scaling. This is how the patch in pure data is seen. We have this circle is like a button. This button must be pressed to do all the calculations. We have here where sorry, it's in Spanish. It says cantidad de divisiones, but it must not be the same amount of divisions of the octet. So when we press this button, we can do the scale, the division, the division of the octet, and we have a graph here that says micro 1. So we can see that here, and we can see this graph to be a little more visual. So this is the first part. This all these objects, all these boxes are connected together, and they do all the operations, all the maths to extract the correct amount of divisions of the octet. Well, let's talk about the making of the scales. In the next part, it was the most complicated part, since the scale had to be made randomly from the scale division that we defined. This scale had to have a certain number of nodes defined. For example, if the octet was divided in 47 parts, and it was chosen to make a scale of 25 sounds, the program had to make a random selection of 25 of these 47 sounds to present them in a form of scales. The simplest way was with an object that called a mean from the else library, which returned an arithmetical mean of a given range of number, and with the number of step request. With this object, elements of the octet division that had been decided to create the scale could be taken. The way will be to take the X proportionally, that is, from the octet division of 25 notes. It was chosen to create a scale of 9 sounds. With this procedure of the mean object will result in the creation of a scale that will have its sound chosen every 3 elements, since it will select them proportionally. The disadvantage of this method will be that it will always result at the same scale when having the same number of nodes. In case of equality, having the same number of divisions, since that ratio will not change. This will give a large but finite numbers of options. So this was a method, but it was a little limited. A more free way was to look for the creation of scales where the number of desired elements that form the scales could be selected, but without these elements be selected proportionally but randomly. This way of creating the scales will bring a practical infinite amount of possibilities. That disadvantage was how it could be done, since that was there the question of programming came in. To carry out this method, each element of the scale had to be chosen randomly, depending on how many steps were chosen, and then ordered in ascending order. When you had this form, you will have to see if any of these elements was repeated, and if it was, so you should go through the whole process again to restart the creation of the scale until you have the scale that doesn't cease to have the repeated sound. As it required a little time to carry out the process, the result took a few seconds to be reflected. Then these two methods described were left as a possibility so that you could be choose between either of them. Another part of the patch was programming was the part to be able to listen to the scales. In this section, we can press a button and we can listen the sound resulting of the scales chosen by any of the two methods. To make it sound, only a sine wave was used with a simple envelopment that allowed only listening each pitch without other distractions. Then an extra part was to create a series from the created scales. It starts the same from another note, the central C. Another were placed randomly through a button. You could listen this series or repeat it if it is necessary. The last part of the patch was the part of the chords, where you could select the number of notes that each chord could carry. They can carry from 3 to 10 notes each. By pressing a button, you could create a chord with the number of notes selected, and each of the notes will be chosen randomly. These notes came from the selected scale. For the selection of chords, they could be done in two ways. One based on the notes within the same octave, or they could be accommodated randomly, being able to appear up to 5 different octaves, which create more interesting sounds and with more possibilities than just respecting the start age. All this could be done with an exhaustive programming process in order to have a desired result, and that all bass sounds were easier to provide, and with them the musical creation was easier. So now let me show you so in the program that was the program I have to do. We can see it here. These graphs are already saved but we can do that when we start again, it can be erased. So let me erase. Okay. So we can put here the amount of division of the octet. So let's see, like 12. I put the amount of divisions. Then with this button, okay, we can see the graph here that shows the starting node, the middle C, and the other division of the octet. Like I put 12, we have all the nodes of the temperate system, but we can also create other kind of scales. For example, quarter tone scales. So when we put the number 24 and we push the button, the scales are made and is already recorded in this graph. So when we need each node, we can take the number of that node and we can use it in any way we want. We can do any kind of division of the octet. If I put this number 81, we can see here the graph that shows 21 division of the octet. So it can be done of any amount of division. Let's use these 35 divisions. So we have here all these microtones that are here. Now we have to do the next part, is the scale. So we can put here any number of nodes that a scale can be created, and I choose 17. So when I push this button, a 17 node scale made of these 35 divisions is made. So the program chooses 17 nodes of this scale and make of this division of the octave and make this scale. We can listen how it sounds. So if we change the number of scale steps, we can listen again. So these scales are made of 11 notes that came from here. So if we want to change the amount of division, like 28, we have to do it again, and also we must put again the number, and we can distribute the scale steps by just pressing this button, and we can listen to it. So if we want more notes in our scale, we can change this, and we can press and again listen. This is the first method I described. These notes, this scale was made by distribute the notes in 15 scale steps, but we can also create a scale totally random. If I push this button, we can see that these steps of the scale are now made randomly, and we can see it continue changing because it presents repeated notes. So we have here another scale that is not the same as the other. Let's hear. So by this other method, we can have some other different scales. I can tell which one is better, but we can try each one. As we can see here, we have a jump between these two notes. This is not right distributed, but it's another way to do a scale, a random scale. The next part of this patch was to use to create a series, a row, like the dodecaphonic row, the 12-tone row, but with this sound of the scale we made. So to do this, I can push this button, and now these notes are serialized. So it's made random, and we can create another random series of these notes made in this scale. So we can do it, and we can also listen this series. We can create another series, and this series is the same, has the same note that this scale. If we change the scale, we can also use another series, and we can listen. Another part of this patch was to the possibility of hearing the series with random rhythms like this. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. But
Excuse me, Jonathan, can we go to the questions? Actually, we are now entering the question time. I mean, we can reduce it a little bit if you need to talk a little bit more. Sorry.
No, don't worry. Yeah, nada más. Only let me talk about the piece. My electroacoustical work has the same structure that the work Metastasis of Yanis Xenakis, and I use it with this graphic here. Metastasis has these sections parts, and also my work, Tenoni, has some similar parts. So we can we have no time to listen, but we have maybe if you want to hear the piece I made with this, I can share you a link and we can use it.
Or maybe we reduce the questioning time. We are all in contact anyway if we have any questions. And so we listen a little bit, actually, after your talk.
Yes, and I wanted to mention that my first question was, can we please hear your music?
Yes,
so that's my question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, especially I was a student of Xenakis, so now I'm very curious.
Yes, as you wanted, we can do it. We can hear a little part of the piece. Let me play it. Meanwhile, if anyone have another question, we can talk about it.
We can also use the chat.
Okay, let me open the let me share you my screen. And tell me if you can hear the sounds. Okay, here's the music.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, I have to cut your presentation. Sorry about that. And
Okay.
I'd like to say to the group, please, for the questions, if it's okay with you, maybe a very quick one from somebody. I mean, I don't want to take time from Nikolaus. Or please do it on the chat. Do the questions there in the chat. It's very late for you, Jonathan. I will pass you. I will thank you for staying so late for you with us. In Puebla, I believe now it might be 2 o'clock in the morning, something like this.
Yes, 2 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry. And yeah, so please, the questions in the chat box, and I will pass them to you, or if you have the chance to join us tomorrow at some point with internet through Zoom for the other presentations, maybe we can also communicate with you this way. Okay, well, thank you very much for your wonderful music, for your wonderful presentation, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to see you online, and yeah, great to have you here.
Thank you, everyone.
And so we will continue. We will end. Okay, yes, we will continue now with. Nikolaus Gerszewski, I think I'm pronouncing properly.
Yes, Gerszewski.
Gerszewski.
Me? Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. I don't see
Okay.
you as well. Yeah. Okay, I need to. Sorry, I just had this on my hand and I just moved it. Yes, Nikolaus Gerszewski, 1968, Hamburg, living
64.
Sorry.
No.
In Hamburg, living in Budapest. Since 2005, autodidactic studies in musical composition. Since 2006, curator of new music concerts in Hamburg and Berlin, co-founder of Festival for Kerrang Music, Blurred Edges, Hamburg 2011, winner of International Composition Contest, Fairytune Moshiri, commissioned by Hamburger Clan Werktage. Since 2012, experimental music workshops at universities and schools. Since 2014, teaching experimental sound production at the University of Fine Arts in Budapest and at the University of Science, PEX. 2015, founding the ensemble Conceptual Sound Productions Budapest. 2016, co-founding the ensemble Mobile Budapest. Since 2019, working as a curator for Transparent Sound Festival in Budapest. 2020, founding OMA, Ordinary Music
OMA, yeah.
Ordinary Music Archives in Budapest, a space for music-related art and art-related music. Sustain for vibraphone solo is published in the anthology Vibraphone Century with Smith Publications. Since 2021, he's a member of the composers collective Frog Pig Music, CD Art for String Quartet, FLIA 011, 2023 forthcoming CDs, works for 12 strings on Head Hat Records. Please welcome Nikolaus Gerszewski.
Okay. So the subject is microchromaticism. I don't know if it's an official term. I Googled it. I couldn't find anything about it. So I thought it may serve my purposes. I wanted to get away from the term microtonality because it suggests an extension of tonality, whereas my work isn't an extension of tonality. It's not connected to it. It is not connected to any interval function or to any musical semantics. So I know that chromaticism initially is also an extension of tonality, but I think the way I use it, at least, it is just a kind of a grid. So this continuum of sound can be divided in semitones or in smaller than semitonal steps. I usually use 6 tones, or sometimes also quarter tones. And the term microchromatic also it is or chromaticism is something that not only exists in music but also in other fields. So it comes from the word chroma, which is color. And I have been formerly a visual artist, so I've studied visual arts in Hamburg, and I've been painting for many years. And unlike in music, in painting, microchromaticism is not even an issue, because the vast majority of paintings are microchromatic. I guess it has to do with the fact that there is usually no notation. So you have to standardize in music. You have to standardize the tones somehow in order to write them down. Whereas most painters, they just paint by eye. The question arises if one composes in such a way that the work is not related to tonality anymore. It is not even related to a musical tradition. If it at all, it should be called music or not. I think some people think it's like John Cage, for example. He said, you don't have to call it music if the expression hurts you. So he kind of got away from this question. Also, other composers like for Anton Beuger, I've talked to him about the issue, and for him it's not even a problem. So he doesn't make this distinction of music or non-music. So it's all just sound. But for me, I think that it's somehow helpful to make this distinction. So even maybe within one and the same composition, there are maybe musical elements and other elements that are not musical. So where I would draw the line is between a text form and an object form. So music in the traditional sense is a text form, meaning that the meaning is found in the sequence of the sounds, whereas with an object form, the sequence is not important. So you have an object like, as for example, with a sculpture, you can view it from the front, from the back, from the side, from above, from below, from wherever you want, but the sequence of the observations, it doesn't matter. So it always remains the same object. And so it is also with my music, which, of course, in an everyday sense of language, I call it music because it's simply more practical. But if I'm getting deeper into it, I would rather speak of it as shaped sound. And shaped sound, the microtonality or the microchromaticism is a result of shaping the sound. So I can use glissandos to shape the sound, or I can make a grid and have little steps and organize the sound in such a way. This differentiation of music and having another medium beside music, which is also a medium of sound, but it's not music. It's not new. I think it first came up with Varese, who spoke of organized sound. So he didn't want to define what music is with organized sound. No, on the contrary, he wanted to define his own work and take a distance from music. So I would prefer the term shaped sound, because organized sound, it suggests that there is a certain amount of sounds who are put in a particular order, whereas shaped sound suggests that there is only one sound. There's only one sound that is produced by many instruments, or maybe only one instrument, but by a certain amount of instruments. But the sound merges, and it becomes one mass, which is shaped then over a certain period of time. So the material I'm working with is not musical material. It is not this material that has been shaped throughout the history of music, but it is more or less just plain sonic matter, which can be brought in any form. And since I always start from a plastical sensation, for me, the most direct way to shape the sound was the string instrument, because there's you don't have a mechanic, so you have you can shape it literally with the finger, just in the same way as one would shape plaster or clay and make this form. You can, if you have enough string instruments, you can basically shape any form you want, and you can divide the continuum of the sound in as many little steps as you want, or you can just make it fluently with the glissando. And so the basic step of getting away from the musical tradition is also to get away from the vocabulary that is being used in a musical context. For example, the concept of the phrase. I don't use phrases in my music, so I would refer to them as cells, which are being modified over the course of the form within the time. These are the difference is, you know, in also in Baroque music, I think you have a kind of an objectification of the sound already, because you have these forms of the rake and the inversion and so on. And so to a certain degree, of course, they are the succession of the events is exchangeable, but what remains is you have always this phrase structure of, you know, question and answer. And that is something I would wanted to avoid. And the next thing that is to avoid is the concept of the tone altogether. So I understand the sound as a continuum, and of course, in order to notate the piece, I have to make a decision for a particular pitch, but it is nothing like a certain point in a continuum, like so and so many centimeters. You make this mark and you go from there to the next mark, and this is the way the piece is noted. When I started composing, the first thing was I had to learn sheet music, and it's basically when I say I'm an autodidactic composer, that's what it means, that I learned sheet music because that was what I needed in order to get my music to the paper. I did not study musical theory or counterpoint or anything, just only the notation. And when I started, at first there was a transition when I still was a painter, and I met some people who were playing Cornelius Cardius treatise. This is the graphic score, you may know it. And I joined this group, and we met like on a fortnightly basis, and in the end we also performed the piece. And so I got an idea of music, that music can be in other ways notated than in traditional sheet music. However, with treaties, it says there's also this idea that the performer can decide how to interpret it. And when I proceeded with this alternative notation, more and more it became clear that I didn't want the performers so much to contribute their own ideas, because my own ideas became more and more clear. And so it afforded a more precise notation, and I just simply couldn't avoid the sheet music. But when I started notating, at first I was just, for 1 year, was just playing on the piano and trying to write down everything I played. But then I thought, this is not the right way to do it. I had to find a system of how I could proceed more practically. And so I reduced the 5 lines of the notation to only 1 line. So the same thing as you have in percussion notation. So you have three options. I can show this. Is this visible? Like here, you know, you have these 3 notes. One is on the line, below the line, and above the line. And then with the next step, you have also accidentals. So from the point of view of shaping the sound, because I needed a situation of total symmetry, so that I could see the form. And from the point of view of symmetry, it kind of made sense to divide the full tone, the whole tone interval into 3 instead of 2. So you have the option of the 2 accidentals, the B and the cross, but the B is a little bit higher than the semitone B, and the cross a little bit lower. So you have 3 tones. And then it looked like this line. You had 9 options, 9 pitches on 1 line. So that makes altogether a 3-tone interval. And then the next step is, I mean, that was pretty much all I needed, because I was not so much interested in melody. So with these 9 pitches, I could work, and then I could decide later which would be the central pitch, the reference tone, and I could also distribute it to the whole ensemble, like as many players as I have. I could so distribute these reference tones. I always use the same material, but it's always then transposed, and it is on different layers. So if I had only very few instruments, so 1 or 2 instruments, what I could do, I could draw another line below that line, and then I had 18 third tones. So 9 on the upper line, 9 on the lower line, and I could also, as is in conventional notation, very often you write a numeral 8 above a note, and it is an octave higher, or below it, and it's an octave lower. So I have a pretty big spectrum only with these 2 lines. And if I have 2 instruments, I would shift this the notation by a semitone, and I would have a 6-tone system. So I have within one part only third tones, but so because of the overlapping, the shifting of the parts by a semitone, I would have altogether a 6-tone system. So that was the way I proceeded. At first, I worked with chance operations. Also, I had a special dice which had only 3 numbers. They were doubled, so 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3. So I had always 3 options, and so the first option obviously was to decide between these 3, below the line, in the middle of the line, or above the line. The next operation would be to determine the accidental, and so on. And then I could have a procedure model according to which I proceeded with these chance operations, and so the music came about. It was kind of I used the chance operation in an opposite way than John Cage, because what I was trying to do is like an imitation of music. So I made procedure models that contain some kind of a figuration. Only the details are then determined by the chance operation. And not only the pitches, but also the durations, and sometimes also the colors and so on. So after a while, it was not so satisfying for me. So because I felt, this was not really a form, it was only a structure. So there was no decisive moment when to start the piece and when to end it. So usually I filled one page of music paper and then a little bit changed the model, and so with the next page I would proceed in a little bit a different way. But so I felt the need of organizing this a little bit more geometrically, or have some permutation model. So very, very simple formulas of how to do it. So yeah, and I realized I then discovered this piece by James Tenoni. It's called Having Never Written a Note for Percussion. And I knew the piece also before, but I didn't think that it would be something that I was interested in. But then I performed it with my students, so with a group of like 8 or 9 people, and it was overwhelming. So the whole piece is just I think you know it, but it's just it's called a swell piece. It starts I think at 5 times P, and then only the volume increases up to 5 times F in the middle, and then back again. And the whole procedure, it lasts about like 10 or 15 minutes, whatever you want. There is, apart from this increase of volume, there's no other form principle. That's the only thing. And yeah, and it's a tremolo. Of course, the most direct way to do it would be on a snare drum or on any other drum, but it can also be done on other instruments. So any instrument that is capable of producing this continuous tremolo. And so we had electronics, we had a cello, we had different kinds of drums and cymbals and so on, and we created a very nice sound mass. And it was very exciting from beginning to the end. Just this phenomenon of the sound becoming louder, and what happens if it becomes louder, and how does the ear adjust to it, and then if you take the volume away step by step, what happens then? And it was a little bit like viewing a picture. I mean, not only a little bit. It was basically the same thing. So it was the whole procedure is completely predictable. You don't have to decode the music. You don't have to think about what will happen next or any of those. It's totally clear. At least, I mean, in the middle, in the beginning, you may still think about whether it will suddenly stop, or whether it will then go, the volume will fade down again. But from the middle, it's obvious that even that question is solved. So it's just pure listening, diving into the sound, and it's diving into the depth of the sound. That is what you do when you view a color field painting, for example, or any abstract painting, but especially a color field painting. The model for that procedure, you may know the painter Ed Reinhardt. He was very influential to me. Ed Reinhardt, he painted in his late period so-called black paintings. There were only black squares, huge black squares. At first sight, they were black. But what he did is he divided the surface into 9 color fields of equal size, and he mixed a little bit of colored pigment into the black. And so he had very different shades of black. And at first sight, you don't see it, but when you view it for a longer time, then you know you get used to the black, so you don't pay attention to the black anymore, and the color comes out more and more, and you see that the painting is actually very colorful. It's not black at all. You see only the color, and the black it just fades away. So this is something I was interested in also translating into a sound form. So I said I have been painting for many years, and you know, if you do it sooner or later, if you cannot sell the paintings, you always have problems with the storage. So at some point, I just saw no sense anymore in producing more and more material and have more and more stuff that I have to store, I have to take care of. So most of it I always threw away. I wasn't even very interested in showing them to anyone. Maybe sometimes to friends, but I wasn't interested in making an exhibition or something. I was interested in making these observations, in working with the colors. And so I thought I somehow have to get rid of the material, and I would have some. I thought I could do probably the same thing also with sound, and the sound then disappears after you made the observation. It's only as long as you need it to make the observation. And yeah, and it worked like that. And so I think it is. Yeah, my work is so still it's not music. It is closer to the visual art than it is to any musical tradition. So that's where it comes from. So wait a minute. So the question is, of course, if this is possible to have this the second medium beside music, and there will of course always be the question will always remain open. So it will not be a decision of is either one or the other, but there's always a fluctuation going on between the two. There, as in, for example, in visual art in the 1960s, there was these new media coming up, like, for example, installation art. There were some artists who viewed it as an extension of sculpture, or sometimes even of painting. But then other artists would insist in it being a new form of art and totally disconnected from the sculpture term or from the painting term. And for that reason, they used also a different material, like so-called non-art materials, which were basically construction materials, like neon or plexiglass or aluminium and so on. Wait a minute, it's 11:15. How much time do I have?
You can still talk 5 minutes, and then we can go to questions.
Yeah, okay. So those artists like Dan Flavin, Don Judd, also Soluit, they avoided these art materials and used construction materials. Of course, that happened also in music in the 60s, that some musicians and composers, they even avoided the classical instruments and used any whatever source to make the sound. It could be everyday objects or utility objects, commodities or whatever. From a point of view of today, on the other hand, you see, if you do that, you are always remain in this context of the 60s art. So if you use as a sculpture, you use plexiglass and neon and these materials, you are connected to the object art of the 60s. So I think today it is only natural to use the art material, which has a very long tradition, but still it is the material that is, I mean, these musical instruments like the violins or the string instruments and all the other instruments, they were designed to make sounds, and they are very good tools for making sounds. And I had a discussion about that also with Peter Ablinger, and he said he thinks that you cannot get away from that the fact that the violin as an instrument is charged with tradition, but I don't see it that way. I see it simply as a tool, and of course, you will associate it with music, with traditional music, with classical music. But when you hear the music, then when you hear the sound, and it's really very different to that what has been composed previously for this instrument. It is applied in a different way. Then I think you will forget about it, and it becomes only a source of sound. So I don't know. I don't really feel like playing any of my music. You could check it out for yourself. It's on my SoundCloud page, or you can also find it via my own website, Nikolaus Gerszewski.de. And where the pieces I was basically talking about are the string pieces. So if you go there, as the three categories, text, sound, image, you of course you chose sound, and then you have the categories enlisted. You go on music for strings, and then there are the string pieces, like Inert Mass. That was the one I was talking about. Basically, that's I would say my signature piece. How much do I have? 1 more minute left? So, hello?
Yes, 1 more minute.
Yeah, 1 more minute. Okay, maybe I should show a little notation that I made. This is can you see this? Yeah, this is a model. You see, these are.
Have you this time so I can make a picture, because I missed it for the others. So yeah, it'd be nice for me. Thank you.
Okay. So what you saw, these very, very quickly, is 2 measures. Each one is to be repeated for 1 minute, but during the repetition, it is modified. So what I was talking about, this swell form that I picked up by Tenoni, I thought the swell principle, it can also be applied to other parameters. For example, also to tempo. So this begins is an 8th pulse, and it accelerates up to a 32nd pulse during this 1 minute of repetition. Then I have these arrows here. That means that a microtonal shifting of the notes. So the first one will shift down, the second one will shift up, so that during this repetition process of 1 minute, it turns from a unison to major third. Then here I have the colors also. So tasto, it begins, then it shifts towards ordinary, towards sul ponticello, and then in the second round it starts at sul tasto and goes the other way, reverse, and also the volume. So that's basically the. Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Okay. Wait a minute. I have to pick up the telephone. I'm right back.
Okay. So yeah, if you want, you can prepare your questions now. And yeah, I mean, there's a question in between, and it's a very interesting topic. I mean, myself, I believe that we are yes. So, Nikolaus, can we go now to the questions? We have 9 minutes. I think Richard might have a question. There's already one question. Can you read it? I mean, Ulrika Soika wrote in the chat box.
Where's the chat? I don't have it open here. How can I do that?
No,
I'm very bad with the technology.
No problem. Congratulations on distinguishing between microtonality and microchromaticity. I distinguish between sonance system, just intonation, and distance system. In example, send distances, which fits your explanations. Ekmel refers mainly to the quarter tones between the semitones. Microchromatics is therefore a very usable technical term. Please listen to my lecture on Sunday where I make suggestions about pitch notation. Do you have any comments about this? Actually, it's not any reflection of on these words.
At what time is it on Sunday?
I will let you know.
Okay, I'm not sure if I can do it because but I try to. Yeah,
so the quarter tones and the ekmelic refers mainly to quarter tones between semitones. Microchromatics. Do you have any opinion about that? Would you like to say anything to?
No, not really. I mean, I wasn't sure that if it's an official term or not. So I checked, I Googled it, and I didn't find anything. So I thought the way I use it, as I said, it refers to color. It's chroma, color. And what is color in music? I mean, color is. I think it's. I'm not quite sure, but as I see it, it's the width of the tone. It's a parameter that doesn't exist in traditional music, but the tone itself. If you see it from the material point of view, it must have a width. It's not only a point on a sheet music, but it has a width as an acoustic phenomenon, and that is the color of it.
Yes, but I mean, first I would like to ask if there are any questions around. Okay, Richard, I will let Richard ask first, and then I give you a shot.
Yeah.
Greetings. Good to meet you and to hear your thoughts.
Thanks.
I was especially inspired early on in your talk about your discomfort with even using the word music.
Yeah.
And for decades now, I've been answering people's question. Well, what kind of music do you do? And I would say, well, actually, it's sound art.
Yeah.
But then the thought that you are also approaching it as a multi media creator, with even the idea of the width of a note is a kind of a physical sculptural component.
Yes.
So what kind of an artist would you respond with, since your art seems to reside either both in the physical visual arts and music or in neither?
Yeah, what was it, the question exactly?
So what kind of artist would you want to be considered?
Yeah, okay.
Is there a name for it?
Yeah, well, if there's a name for it, I don't know. I don't think names matter so much. They, of course, you have always in conversations, you have to explain what you're doing, and that's a bit uncomfortable. So I say, okay, I'm a composer when someone asks me. But if I go deeper into the discussion, then of course I would say I'm shaping sound. I'm not. I wouldn't use the word sound artist, because that's. I think it's an existing artistic genre, which I think it grew out of visual arts, and it has no performance aspect. I think in sound art, it's only objects, and also the sound is ended, so there is no beginning and no end. Which, of course, that's also valid for my music. So all my pieces, they are shaped as a loop, so they always arrive at the same point where they started. It takes a long time, sometimes 20 minutes or so, but they always arrive at the point, and then they are, if there's time, they will be repeated once. They could also be repeated many times. If I would think of an ideal presentation form for my music, which of course it's not realizable, but there would be so kind of little chapels when the musicians stand around in the circle, and then the observer can step in. They would be open all day. The music would be performed all the time, so you can decide for yourself when to go in and out. But that's very, very difficult to realize. So I have to stick with the concert form.
Perhaps in Rothko Chapel.
Yeah.
That would be a wonderful space.
Yeah, it would. Yeah.
Thanks.
And
Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Any more questions around? For me, I mean, I'm becoming more and more, I'm also a graphic artist, Nikolaus.
Yeah.
I think I'm not researching at all. It's just a bigger opinion, and a big interest is growing. And at some point, I'm going to have to really find some answers to my questions. But in a way, I feel that we are trapped in our perception mechanism in our brain, because we don't perceive music the way we perceive colors. I mean, microtonality. I mean, you can, for example, one of these pianos metamorfoseados by Julián Carrillo, so you can do a glissando, microtonal glissando, and then kind of, if it's just one voice, then you can also do a microtonal glissando with colors. And until here, my brain can more or less compare, and they can understand them quite well. Mm-hmm. But for me, the problem is mixing two voices or mixing two colors, because the colors, then we get one frequency when we mix. When we mix two sounds, we get an interval. So the brain, so this is,
I know.
aspects different, and I don't know how it would be in nature without human interaction. How we perceive them, because they might be different. Actually, it's just the way we develop our brains to get audio information and to get information. So it's I don't know if you have any thoughts about it.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I certainly have. So first of all, yes, of course, if you play two notes at the same time, you have an interval, they merge perfectly. With the colors, well, it depends. You know, there are painters, of course, like what was his name? This impressionist painter, Seurat, I think. You know, he put two colors next to each other, and he made a kind of a grid of colors, and the colors, they merge in the eye of the observer. So this is something that happens also in painting. But what is even more important, I think, it is not so much this translation of sounds into colors, and so that it doesn't matter, because what all that matters is it's a particular way of observing the material. And it's all the work of art, what it communicates, and what also to me an abstract painting communicates in the same way as a composition of music is the way it is made, or the observation, the process is more or less a reversal of the creative process.
Yes.
And that is something I want to communicate.
Yeah, excuse me, Nikolaus. I have to interrupt you. It was my fault bringing this this question. I thought maybe we would have time. We are 1 minute over time. And
All right.
Thank you so much. We will be in touch.
Yes.
I have some thoughts, some questions. Maybe we can talk one day, because I'm also myself as an artist very, very interested in these topics, and I'm looking for answers actually.
Yes. Okay.
And so thank you so much for sharing your masterclass, your lecture with us. And now we will have to continue with composer Benn Lunn. He's
Okay.
here. Hello, Ben. Okay.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? It's
A little bit.
lovely to hear, particularly the end of that discussion as well. I will quickly see if this will let me share. Very nice. This is going positively so far.
Can I make a little
Yes.
presentation about you, Ben?
Yes. So before I sort of jump into all of this, I am a composer based up in North Lanarkshire in Scotland. I'm currently doing my PhD at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, where I the main focus of my work is looking at how composers use politics in their work. And so for the purposes of this particular conference, I thought looking at some really curious examples of how composers have used microtones as a way of sort of expressing this kind of political leanings in various different forms. So as my abstract indicates, the whole element of this discussion will be on socialist realism, microtonality, and the left in general in Britain. The three composers I'll be focusing on will be myself, the choral composer and conductor James Weeks, and then the other British composer Lawrence Dunn. In my abstract, I do allude to Zhdanov, but that's mostly as point of reference. I won't give him any real sort of discussion, because the big problem, particularly within Britain, is his shadow sort of overwhelms a lot. So we don't actually get to see a lot of the curiosity that exists within some of the theoretical elements that have evolved and flourished within Britain. But obviously, it's one of those topics where you can't ignore it. It'll be like sort of talking about 20th century music and ignoring Schoenberg and so on. So for the structure of the talk, I will just give a brief as possible history of how sort of socialist realism has evolved within Britain separately. And then I'll discuss the three works and just then give some thoughts and conclusions. Then obviously we'll have hopefully time for some nice bits of discussion. So for a brief history of socialist realism in Britain, the first major figure we have to look at is William Morris, who was born in 1834 and lived until 1896. He was a fascinating individual, one, because he, like with many sort of individuals of this time, came from a very middle-class background, but because of his introduction to Marxism, his fascination with handicraft as well, he was always very eager about sort of promoting the lower classes of Britain at that time, and so produced a lot of theoretical ideas in the Socialist League's newspaper, The Commonweal. And he, during his lifetime, he was friends with the likes of Eleanor Marx, Gustav Holst, and even Peter Kropotkin. And he was always constantly looking at ways to sort of try and highlight the importance of it, because obviously at this point in Victorian England, the discussions around art were always about how lovely it is, or the freedom of the artist, but not necessarily about democratic things like how every person, even sort of a very poor labourer, should have access to art at all. And one particular book that he wrote called News from Nowhere is arguably one of the first books of socialist realism in Britain, where this individual is living in Victorian Britain, goes to sleep after a very rough night, and then wakes up hundreds of years in the future, where sort of humanity has gone beyond the need to produce and beyond the need of profit and all this other kind of stuff, and is just able to live, and just discovering what life could be like once we sort of got over the current troubles that we have currently. His contemporary Edward Carpenter is another one to sort of highlight a little bit, because between the two of them, they're often referred to as utopian socialists, namely this fear of what the world will be like once we've got rid of the horrors of capitalism, but not necessarily clear cut steps on how to make it, but also slightly dreamlike, which, to be honest, is one of the real charms of William Morris, to be honest. And I think it's quite nice to hold on to that. So even though utopian socialist tends to sometimes be chucked at them as a negative, it adds to their charm, in my personal opinion. These two particular quotes from Morris just puts it really beautifully, doesn't it? Have nothing in your house that you do not know to be beautiful or believe to be useful. And I do not want art for a few any more than an education for a few or freedom for a few. And so within that, it surmises a lot of his philosophy in various different ways, but also it's just particularly wonderful in the sense of this discussion of, say, like freedom and education for a few being tied in with art. So if you've got this, a slight pragmatism is probably maybe the way to describe it, but then also making sure art is very deeply included in that, where a lot of socialist theorists tend to forget that art is an important thing as well and just talk about the struggle. Anyway, the next important and significant step in Britain in regards to sort of this development of this area of theory was the foundation of the Communist Party of Great Britain, which happened in 1920. This came about mostly because Lenin himself had criticised the British socialist movement for being unorganised and not really having any clear answers to say, like, what do you do with the parliamentary struggle and also the different elements. And so this was discussed in Lenin's essay, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. And so numbers of the key political figures on the left in Britain were just heavily criticised. And so after the formation of the Communist Party, what was quite interesting is it wasn't just about the very typical struggles that you find within, say, political parties of this nature. So there was obviously the typical trade union militancy or the party campaigning, propaganda work and all this other stuff. But there were also a lot of academic elements that came out of it. And so one of the most successful parts of this work was the Communist Party historians group, which included individuals. Some had drifted in and out, but at some period of time, they included Christopher Hill, Eric Hobsbawm, Raphael Samuel, E.P. Thompson, and A.L. Morton. And so what this meant is that because of having this encouragement to make sure that the theoretical elements could be developed, it encouraged that kind of intelligentsia to be able to be engaged in the party in some form and then develop theories on from it. And as one communist MP, Willie Gallagher, described it, to be a good communist, you need to be a good student, which I think is quite an important development, because with a lot of this kind of theoretical stuff, if it's individuals acting independently, it means there isn't necessarily a chance to be able to engage with it. Whereas obviously, if you have forums like we have here today, it gives a chance for theories to be challenged, to be tested, and all this other kind of stuff, which means it has this wonderful place to grow from. And this, we then saw in the 1930s, particularly, a huge swathe of various different academics coming out from the Communist Party. The most successful, arguably, is Christopher Caldwell, who was born 1907 and died in 1937, where he had died in Spain fighting alongside the Republican forces against Franco. His theoretical works are probably the most influential sort of socialists that have come out throughout sort of British history, even to the point where, say, individuals like Helmut Lackerman have quoted him and used him as inspiration for his theories and so on. I've got a list of key publications there, but what he was quite fascinating and quite skillful at doing is he was able to discuss how sort of society evolved and how art focused alongside that. His own particular field was poetry, and so he did highly emphasize the role of poetry and literature and so on. So didn't necessarily target music in the same way, but the parallels are very obviously there. So say, talking about in very primitive society, the poetry is more about information and what's around you. So, like, for example, we don't have in Britain any folk tales about kangaroos because we had no interaction with it, as a great example of that kind of stuff, and showing how it's evolved, how the role of the individual changes with that kind of society. And then how, on top of that, then as we're then pushing towards, say, a socialist society, what that potentially could mean for the artist, or how an artist can antagonize on that particular front. a contemporary of his is Ralph Fox, who is quite overshadowed by Christopher Caldwell in many different ways, mostly because I think Christopher Caldwell was quite fortunate to have a huge swathe of publications across the board, whereas Ralph Fox, and also theoretically, Ralph Fox was much more narrow in a lot of his discussions. There's a few bits, obviously, about, say, political problems. There's one book about, say, the British colonialism and so on, but the other sort of publications he has are mostly on literature and the novel. So this is the big one being the novel and the people, which, in a very similar vein of thought to Christopher Caldwell, has that same kind of vision. And what I forgot to also mention with Caldwell as well is that between him and Ralph Fox, their vision of what socialist realism could be is incredibly radical. I think that's the thing that's often missed, because whenever we sort of mention Zhdanov and so on, it tends to sort of assume that the proletariat, the working class or lower class, whatever group we're trying to target this at, is a relatively conservative one. And so there's always that sort of discussion or sort of force to make artists meet that class where they are currently, and not a vision to see where that class could be. Whereas with Ralph Fox and Christopher Caldwell, they're essentially in the reverse, where essentially the socialist realism should be addressing the problems of today, which are related to the people, but constantly challenging them to move forward, because that is realistically the point. You're not supposed to just be happy with your lot, you're supposed to be moving forward in some way. And so this fantastic quote from Ralph Fox really surmises it quite well. To understand, to know reality, it is necessary to have a theory of knowledge corresponding to truth, and truth is not abstract and motionless. An art which accepts such philosophy is truly in a position to reach an understanding comprehending all forms and creeds. It is a really human art which permits the creative worker to win his ardent battle with reality. That is one important one. And then the second quote, which I think is very important for us to understand, and why I wanted to make sure that when we discuss socialist realism in Britain, there is a different kind of understanding that exists. It is the only fairest criticism, self-criticism, to acknowledge that neither the Soviet novel nor the novels of Western revolutionary writers have yet succeeded in fully expressing this. The writers do not add thereby to our knowledge of man or really extend our consciousness and sensibility. And so obviously this is written at the point where there's the greatest criticisms of artists happening within the Soviet Union. And we have Ralph Fox criticizing this heavily and talking about how we need to be challenging our listeners, our readers and so on, because reality can be morphed, it can be changed, because at the end of the day, if we are dealing with material circumstances can be changed, and it's using the arts to be able to make that kind of make that connections and so on. In the realm of music, we have Alan Bush, who is a very, very significant figure, who was born 1900 and died 1995. And it's quite interesting in sort of the way he's discussed within Britain, because often he is stereotyped as a Zhdanovite who just followed party line, didn't think very much, and just did as the Communist Party did, when in reality there's a lot more greater discussion within his work and a lot more sort of nuance to what is happening in the way he is reacting. However, he's quite an interesting sort of figure as well. Because of his political leanings, he was very heavily censored by the British across the board, which meant that he had been blacklisted by the BBC, which meant for the majority of his life, and arguably still to this day, he's not very covered by the BBC because of that blacklisting. A large proportion of his works were premiered in the German Democratic Republic or the Soviet Union or other socialist nations. He even got kicked out of the Caribbean by the British because they presumed he was going to Guyana to encourage the rebellion against British colonialism. And so they didn't want him to just go and talk to people there at all. And all these various other different surreal parts of his life that went alongside it. But with his life and his work as a composer, he went through quite a big, theoretically anyways, a big sort of theoretical evolution as he went along. As with Ralph Fox and with Christopher Caldwell, both of them died at the end of the 30s. And because, as you'll have seen with the reference to the publications, most of them were published after they died. And so this was one of the greatest sort of problems, I think, for socialist realism generally in Britain, where we had these individuals who had a very different point of view, but died before the Second World War started and ended. And so they weren't able to sort of plug the gap that the new Cold War mentality was bringing in. And so there was a sort of a lag that happened as a result of this. And so for Alan Bush, he's sort of engaging with, say, Shtavanov's point of view, and even sort of criticizing it, that particularly in the decisions about how you deal with artists if they are presumed to be not full or just being too self-indulgent or a bit too bourgeois or something. There was that sort of engagement with it, but not really to the same extent, and it's still very, very critical of it. And later, when we got into the 50s, particularly after Christopher Caldwell is much more heavily published, we see Alan Bush referring to this in a much greater detail. And within that, builds on from what Caldwell does, and then is able to sort of produce the equivalent for music, which he highlights that then, say, for socialist art, it can be a very important thing for music, and it can be a very creative and contemporary thing. And so within his works, he still, say, uses a lot of serialism, which exists within there, while trying to still be very clear to the people, which almost sounds a complete contradiction when we compare it to the circumstances in the USSR. Similarly, in 1970, there was a controversy around Hans Werner Henze, who essentially, after one of the premieres of his operas, talked very publicly about this fight for socialism. And Alan Bush pointed out in an article around that period of time that the only reason he was given that platform at all is because he fitted to the sort of the bourgeois notions and popular bourgeois ideals at the time. But the fact he was able to use that to push a socialist idea meant he was able to bring that challenge to an audience that otherwise wouldn't have listened to him. And on the flip side, had Hans Werner Henze been significantly more conservative, like say Benjamin Britten, he wouldn't have been given that opportunity at all. And so it's quite interesting how he sort of suggests and implies that actually using radical music can have a way to connect to people and challenge people across the board. And on a tangential note, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Alan Bush particularly, is Alan Bush had formed an organization called the Workers' Music Association in 1936. And this was built as a sort of trade union affiliated group to help make music more accessible to the working class. And as part of that, there were numerous individuals he had encouraged to be elected to be vice presidents to essentially promote the work that they were doing. And one of the individuals who was a vice president from 1941, if not earlier, was Alois Harber, particularly the predominant microtonal composer in Central Europe at that point. And so the fact that Alan Bush knew him very, very well, enough to suggest that he was worthwhile to be a person to promote the work of the Works Music Association, not only shows that Alan Bush was aware of microtonality, but also had an understanding that it could be very, very useful in the realm of socialist realism and so on. The next major figure, who's probably also quite known to many individuals here, is Cornelius Cardew. His essay, Stockhausen Serves Imperialism, is arguably his most famous work that he did, outshining numerous elements of his musical output. And the essay was written at the height of his Maoist period. And within it, he sort of highlights the difficulties that music has, and one within Britain at that time being extremely conservative in a classical sense, but also seen at the same time in the likes of Darmstadt and other centres. The structures are essentially identical. It's just a more radical veneer that is there. And both of them are essentially betraying the working class, or not engaging or not pushing political spectrum further because of that. What's interesting with Cardew himself is his feelings about Maoism changed. So actually, whether Stockhausen Serves Imperialism is a reflection of his political ethos throughout his life is unclear. But what's quite interesting is his influential scratch orchestra is still very prevalent and still an important cultural legacy that exists today. And so there is still an output that exists thanks to him. Obviously, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Marxist theory became quite unpopular. There are not as many people discussing it across the board. However, one individual who became very important throughout his lifetime was Mark Fisher, whose particularly important book, Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative, which was written in 2009, discusses how, because of that collapse of the Soviet Union, we are in this trap where we're essentially forced to believe that neoliberalism is our only option. There is nothing else. And so what on earth do we do with this? How do we deal with this reality? Is there a way to overcome it? And particularly the difficulties where now, as we see in lots of political work, there are many things that just essentially become a brand as soon as they've become slightly radical. If we look at, say, like the Black Lives Matter movement, it very quickly went from being an important antagonism against the repressions that exist in the US, but it's now become a branding thing, which everyone can say without actually addressing any of the problems. And this is one of the big problems that Mark Fisher's trying to address. And sadly, he didn't really manage to come up with a strong enough answer, though he did have some ideas with like this one idea of a acid communism, which is just a really wonderful idea. But I don't know if he'd lived longer, bless him, or still alive today, maybe we would have got somewhere significantly further. So as you've seen across these different figures, the sort of stereotype of, say, Stakhanovites and fighting against grubby capitalists and kulaks isn't really a theme that exists in British socialist realism, and the aesthetic is not really the core point. It's usually the means that you're trying to use, which makes it quite an interesting sort of standpoint. And this is where, say, microtones could be an option on top of that. What's also quite interesting as well within Britain today, since 2010, particularly with the economic crash, there has been a resurgence and sort of a greater interest in socialism across the board. Similarly, with the lead up to Scottish independence vote in 2014, discussions around Welsh independence, Brexit vote, the Corbyn years in the Labour Party has meant that there is a greater political upswing. So even though the late 90s and early 2000s political neutrality became the norm, we're now starting to see lots more artists coming out being political. However, it's not to the same extent that we've saw previously with the other individuals I've mentioned, where they're associated with a specific party, but more they're just very eager to engage with people as widely as possible and try and use their art for good. So this brings us very nicely onto the first composer and finally onto some music, and I can stop talking about Marxist theorists and so on. James Weeks, born in 1971, is a very fascinating composer, and he's been a very good proponent for microtonal music in Britain, thanks to his wonderful choir Exaudi, who have been doing wonderful renditions of the likes of Nikolai Vicentino and all these other different figures. So having that sort of personal knowledge to sort of perform it means that when he's then composing it, it's always very deeply within his work. And this particular piece I wanted to focus upon, The Freedom of the Earth, is a huge two-movement work based on the political work of Gerard Winstanley. For those who do not know, Gerard Winstanley was a major proponent of a political alternative that appeared shortly after the British Civil War, where many people who were critical of Oliver Cromwell, who essentially replaced the monarchy with a very similar tradition, just not necessarily a God-given person, but just essentially with Oliver Cromwell because he won the war. And so with Gerard Winstanley's work, he is constantly talking about ideas of like how the land was made by God and so should be more accessible to everyone as well. And or how if it's made by God, it's meant for all of us, and these kind of things shouldn't be taken away from us. And so because of that kind of work, there's a huge amount of leaflets and works and campaigns that existed. And so across the two movements, what James Weeks is trying to do is essentially slightly portray Gerard Winstanley in West London originally, starting out with that initial propagandizing, just all the various different leaflets trying to get to people around him locally in Putney. And then the second is almost like he is progressing outside of London, exploring the countryside and going to find people and so on. The first movement is chaotic, and it's the energy behind it is fantastic. So this is just the structure that goes on throughout all of it. So starting off with this sort of Andreessen-like antagonisms and attacks and so on. And across all of these sections, it's different groupings focusing on a small selections of texts which keep just reiterating it and hammering the point through. And yeah, it's really hard to surmise exactly what's happening, because with all the different groupings, the textual things are very different. The timbral elements are very, very different, and all these various different ways, but it's just tons of energy and so on. But hopefully this should start playing a small excerpt from this movement. So across all of those, there's a total of 23 different quotes which appear across 37 different blocks. And the whole movement comes to an end with the wonderful mantra from Gerard Winstanley: work together, eat bread together, declare all this abroad. And it's a really wonderful sort of surmising and unifying call that Gerard Winstanley came out with. As I mentioned, the second movement is more like a procession where we slowly evolve elements bit by bit. So it starts off with the guitar and piano, where the guitar has been detuned on numerous strings, and different elements and different parts of the ensemble coming in bit by bit. So it's almost like we are watching this procession of people coming out of London, going out to see everyone individually. So across all of this, we sort of see the act of Winstanley's propagandizing being the focus of the musical rendition. It's not like he's been turned into this sort of heroic cantata, like he's a religious figure who's died, even though he was a very religious man himself. It's more about the political sense being the central point. And similarly, it doesn't sort of descend into slightly cheesy agitprop, but more just a reverence of what the topic is, namely, work together, eat bread together, declare all this abroad. To bring us now onto our second composer, who I'll do another flying visit of, is Lawrence Dunn, who was born in 1992, and he has had lots of success in various different forms recently, including doing very, very well at the Howdy Amos Music Fest back in, I think it was 2022 or 2021, I can't remember which year. But this particular work, We Are All Okay, is very typical of Lawrence, where it is, you have this sort of sense of rhythmic and harmonic ambiguity and lilting lines which feel familiar, but because of the microtones and because nothing lines up very clearly, it's just always uncanny. And it's really quite bizarre in that instance, where you can sort of feel both at ease and unnerved the entire time you're listening to it. But what makes this work sort of stand out sort of in a political sense is the use of natural sounds, namely bird song, and recordings of birds do appear. But the bigger one is the appearance of sounds of veal calves being taken away from their mothers and them crying out. And so you just have this very strange sensation where you're listening to this almost sweet music, but knowing that these individual animals have been taken away from their mothers to be slaughtered. And so it's just, once again, that dichotomy between the two just makes everything very unnerving, but very, very familiar at the same time, which is just surreal. To look at the sort of the structure of the work, it is a slightly more evolutionary block kind of thing, where we start with this chorale figure, which just, and just slowly unwinding, where it eventually gets brought to a close thanks to the birdsong and the harpsichord. The middle section is slightly more dance-like, and then finally at the end, as mentioned, it's just the contrasting of the viol and then Alberti bass and very familiar things, just makes it all very, very bizarre. Though Lawrence himself has never used his music to sort of highlight anything political, he himself is really quite open in different ways, and particularly sort of to the left of what is the Labour Party here. But within this work, the uncanny element, I think, it just sort of, it's once again something that becomes very key, I think, in a lot of Lawrence's work, where we get this sense of either an expression of alienation or finding a way to sort of delve into this sort of strange pessimism we find ourselves in, namely this sort of trap of neoliberalism, but then trying to find a way out. Similarly with the title, it could be read in a sort of a very flippant British manner, like where if someone asks, how are you doing? And, oh, can't complain, we're all okay, kind of thing. And it's just that kind of brushing off things, which just makes it very endlessly fascinating. And it's very hard to sort of pin down exactly what it's doing. And so back in 2021, I did an interview with him and sort of wrote a bit more about his work. And I think the quote, and don't want to toot my horn too much, but I think it just does sort of surmise what's happening. So I'll leave the quote up and then we can have a listen to an excerpt from the closing of We Are All Okay. So as you can see, it is a strangely familiar and unfamiliar all at the same time. It's endlessly fascinating to us. So that brings us on to the final one, which is Misel. I don't want to waste too much time because I always find it slightly strange, composers chatting about themselves and trying to show off how intelligent we are. Once again, more uncanny feelings. But essentially, this piece of music was commissioned by Orchestre de Airprice as part of the Young Composers meeting. And essentially wanted to tap into a particular circumstance we've had in Britain, where between 2021 and 2023, we've seen sort of the biggest upswing in sort of political activity from trade unions, where there's been almost one form of strike action from literally every single trade union that exists in Britain. And one of the key proponents of that has been the railway union, the RMT, and their General Secretary, Mick Lynch, has sort of managed to gain a bit of sort of notoriety because he was being able to be such a good individual dealing with interviews and just highlighting the particular concerns and how the internal problems within the RMT and within the rail network are reflective in the rest of society as a whole, which has meant there's been a huge upswing in support for trade unions across the way. And so for Misel, coming from a region of Britain which has had a huge history of trade unionism in various different ways, it's been sort of the most optimistic thing for me, and it's been really very positive, and wanted to sort of tap into that in some form. And so within the work, I gathered a collection of quotes and speeches from Mick Lynch, who is the General Secretary of the RMT, Eddie Dempsey, who is his Vice General Secretary, but also the former General Secretary, Bob Crow, which all sort of talk about, say, the current problems we have, how we can fight them, the urge to fight, but then also ultimately coming to the conclusion at the very end, we are back, the working class is back. We refuse to be meek, we refuse to be humble, and we refuse to be poor anymore. And so within that, I've just wanted to give this sense of, we start off from a point of chaos where the harmonic idea, it's very hard to work out where we are. But then eventually we managed to see not only sort of this ultimately spectral underpinning with the reliance on the harmonic series, but then to give that sort of push to the final end in this slightly unifying fashion. And so to tie into that, because Mick Lynch, ML, I thought me and La having that as the two different fundamentals, and just that is the overall journey across the board. And using the wonderful phrase, the sun shines on the good, and that's why the Tories are stuck in a bunker in Westminster in the dark, as the point where we suddenly land on this bit. So here's a short excerpt of this bit of music.
The sun shines on the good.
And it goes on like that for nearly 10 minutes, and you can find it on Bandcamp and so on. But yeah, so me closing remarks is just, so between the three of us, we sort of see within James Reek that wonderful tapestry where we're being offered historic lessons, which if we learn from it could teach us a lot about society today, while also managing to sort of tap into the energy and desperation of the people standing up. In Lawrence Dunn's work, we were able to see the alienation and the struggle against the fight that we currently have of this political stagnation in Britain and in many other nations in the West. And then in my own work is then that celebration of the upswing of the trade union movement. All three of us, the political concerns are different. The aesthetics are slightly different as well, though this isn't necessarily a negative thing. It just sort of shows that there isn't necessarily a school of thought or a collection of composers, much like, say, the Communist Party historians group. There isn't that unifying group to lead us, and to be honest, there doesn't need to be, but it's just always worth stating, because you never know how music critics and musicologists will talk about such things. But one thing that sort of unifies the three of us is it's a manner which is very similar to Luigi Nono, which is namely politically concerned composers using contemporary methods to push the political meaning across. Overall, we can't necessarily say any of the works will be, say, as popular as Pierre de Guetta's Internationale, or become synonymous with political movements like, say, Bella Ciao and the Italian Partisans. Though what is quite interesting is ultimately, we see this radical trend re-emerging in Britain, which hasn't really been to the same strength as in the past. But what is eternally interesting is we have something that is a idea where, so realism could be a potentially radical thing, which is then free of, say, the likes of Stalin or Zhdanov, but stands as a curiously very British thing. And regardless of how well the three of us managed to reach the people as a whole, it's just quite nice that we have this radical history, which is just another curiosity for this lovely island. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening to me waffle for half an hour.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ben. It's great great presentation, great music, and it's great. It's wonderful to that you are sharing your ideas. And I would like to, we have still 6 minutes for a question round. The presentation, you did it yourself. Normally I present the lectures, but it doesn't matter. It was faster. Any questions around? Richard is, okay. Of course. Richard, microphone, please.
Here we go.
Yes.
Greetings. Thank you for that. As you continue to speak, I had a growing concern for the danger of academia wanting to codify the for the people art. And I mean, we're not captives of the Mozarteum today, but it also concerns me, as for example, flamenco dance was absorbed into the ballet conservatories in Spain. Doctoral theses were being written analyzing, for example, in this case, perhaps one of your pieces, and dissecting it and then not really putting it back together. How do you keep the music being for the people?
I think that's ultimately my PhD question, isn't it? But the challenge is understanding that academia needs to be engaged with in some point. It's much like, say, a radical party would have to engage with the parliamentary process, even if the parliamentary process is stacked against them. And so it's trying to use as much of that as possible to build the knowledge, but make the connections that exist, because obviously, thanks to academia, there may be people across the world that maybe help connect dots, help sort of clarify the idea and so on. But ultimately, it's making sure that you can get out and about into the public eye in various different ways, or by doing things like constantly engaging with the political things that exist, or sort of upswings and turns within just as human society as a whole. So I think hoping to see, say, more composers, say, crying out about, say, the injustices of war or the environmental catastrophe in a much more demanding way, instead of the current sort of slightly polite discussions about the environmental crisis we see today, or engaging with, say, trade unionism or other kinds of struggles around the place, can help engage it. Because I think, particularly with, say, the example of Alan Bush, he was an individual who was relatively trapped in the Royal Academy in London, where he was teaching, but most of his music was performed abroad. But because of his work within, say, the trade union movement and through the Works Music Association, he was able to find other ways to connect. And so sometimes it might just be down to the composer constantly finding, where are people, how do we get to them, and making sure that question is at the forefront of their mind.
So you're suggesting that it is somehow beneficial to infiltrate the academic world in order to get the information out into the world at large.
Yeah, and it's also just in regards to academia, then engaging that front, but also making sure we don't forget that we are part of reality as well. And I think that's often problems that composers face, particularly when we're talking about theoretical elements of music. We tend to get stuck into arguing about, this is the correct interpretation of microtones, or this is the correct interpretation of serialism, and so on, instead of going, at the end of the day, people outside have no idea. Let's just show them the music and go from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions in the group for Ben, please? Otherwise, Ben, sometimes I have to be available for the festival, happening a lot of things continuously. I don't know if you mentioned about colonialism aspects. I didn't hear them myself, but I was
So within this element in Britain, there's been some discussions about it, but obviously discussing post-colonialism in Britain is a bit of an oddity, because at the end of the day, we were a major part of the colonial world. So our interaction with it is very, very different. But there are a few examples in the past where individuals have been using their art, tapping into that. So Alan Bush is another good example, where in the 1960s, he wrote an opera called The Sugar Reapers, which was also, in its German premiere, was called Guyana Johnny. And it is very much about the Guyanese people revolt against the horrors of colonialism in Guyana. And so there are this topic does appear, though obviously the biggest people who push and are very good in the theories of, say, post-colonialism are, say, the diaspora from, say, Palestine, India, and all these various different parts of the world which Britain colonized in different ways. Whereas essentially within the British population broadly, it's not as strong a topic, because it's not as direct a problem. Whereas the problem we have is the current capitalist state. We haven't been colonized by anyone else, so we just have pure capitalism to deal with.
Okay. Yeah, I meant a little bit more particularly connected to microtones. I mean, it happened
Yes.
that I just had a discussion this week with somebody talking about microtones. I was talking about my work, and then so post-colonialism aspects of microtonality. And then, I mean, the way he knew that I mentioned several times, I use my music as a bridge between folk music from many different regions and contemporary music and my creation. So kind of, it's of course connected to post-colonialism, but at the same time, because it's not authentic, I mean, I just use myself 36 divisions of the scale. It's just a little closer to reproduce or to imitate some of these folk music, microtonal folk musics of the world. And also I see microtonal music belongs mainly to folk music, how I see it as an artist. And but then actually today, I mean, there are so many different interpretations depending on which side, depending on your experiences, everything, because it could also, I mean, from musicians from these regions, they could also be interpreted as cultural appropriation. Like, okay, what are these Europeans now doing? They are, I mean, you never know. Do you have an opinion, or did you have any thoughts in your work about it?
It's a very difficult topic across the board, and within sort of, as mentioned, Britain generally, because of that political thing, there hasn't been that much discussion from British Marxists about how it taps in. And so that's sort of one element to address with it, though there are musicians and composers in Britain who have come from elsewhere. So there's the wonderful composer Susan Lolivar, who, because of her, I think it's either Iraq or Iran, which is very terrible. I should know this better. But essentially, because of where in the Middle East she is from, she often refers to microtones as a way to express that native element. And as part of that, say, pushing against bits from there. And similarly, when we talk about, say, post-colonialism, there's always this question of post-whose colonialism as well, which makes the interactions very, very different, because what kind of music is being pushed on, what music are you sort of responding against, and all this other kind of stuff, which is very, very difficult, where often can sometimes just be reduced to European means Germanic, when actually, say, for individuals in Algeria, it's against the French specifically. So maybe the British music may not be as seen as a hostility, so there's lots of all these different kind of questions. But within my own music, because there isn't that temperate music is not a natural thing, coming into microtones and then maybe just engage with folk music means that it's something that we are very common. It's just obviously if you start being an individual who suggests, oh yes, I'm accurately portraying music from Persia or from all these different areas, that's when it becomes very much a problem. But I'm very much of the opinion of, if it inspires you and you engage with it and sort of appreciate where you are in connection to it, that there can be a lot of learning from both sides.
Mm-hmm. Yes. At the end, I mean, we are free, and this is, I mean, to interchange culture and ideas and artistic ideas. I mean, it doesn't have to be too political, because at the end, I'm completely free to interchange things, my art or my ideas with you or with anyone in the world. So yeah, sometimes it's if we classify everything, it's always very. Yeah, it's not
true, but there is also then the political choice of choosing to engage. So this is once again where, with coming back to the Alan Bush example, when he went, one of the reasons he wanted to go to Guyana is to learn about Guyanese folk music. Mm-hmm. And so that was very much for the purpose of then having an opera which used Guyanese folk music to depict the Guyanese, and then have his music depicting the British, and creating that. So there can be very political choices. And it's, if you do that willingly, it can be really powerful. It's that awareness is always very, very much needed, instead of just lazily going, it's not from your culture, don't touch it, which is infuriating.
Some people, there's always very different opinions. And
yes,
I try. And by the way, I just put on the chat box, I put some videos of James Wick. I didn't know that he was also a composer. I know he's as a conductor, especially his Vicentino videos. I really love them. So I put this one video. And one very last question. I mean, I also put in the chat box Leopold Koa. He studied at the London School of Economics. He really fits into your group very, very well. And his quotation, "Small is beautiful," this is like the quotation of our symposium. So we are very connected to Leopold Koa, just in case. I mean, I wanted to mention this. And
I don't know. I'm going to investigate. Thank you for that suggestion.
And congratulations for your beautiful music. Your presentation, really fantastic. I liked it very, very much myself. Thank you for being with us, Ben. And I will
thank you for having us. I'm sorry I'm not in Salzburg with everyone. It would have been significantly more fun, but I'm glad I could still take part.
Yes, thank you so much, and good luck with your research, and all the best. And please keep us informed of your progress and everything. Just write to the Facebook page or to the Melic Society, whatever. We'll be happy to hear from you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us, everyone.
So we are finishing now the online session. So we will do the in-person presentation in a couple of hours. So you can find the program on the webpage. And thank you very much to everyone. And bye-bye. Ciao. Bye-bye.